Lee Kyung-suk, a mother who spent her entire life sacrificing everything for her family. She was the very symbol of devotion, yet her son Se Min-wook never once managed to say thank you. After his mother passed away, Min-wook lived consumed by regret. Min-wook's life had been that of an ordinary working man. He had spent every single day drowning in overtime, unable to even imagine something like work-life balance. It was something he had never even stopped to think about before. All the way until the age of 40, he had never truly questioned what he had been working so hard for. He blamed himself for not even being able to sit beside her and listen to her stories with a smile while she was still alive. At that moment, two older men entered the room. One of them gently told Min-wook to switch places with his sister and get some rest. He warned that if this continued, Min-wook would collapse before anyone else. They were Uncle Suho and Uncle Junho. They commented that Min-wook truly worked at a big company and said the company even took care of employees like this during funerals. Hearing those words, Min-wook gave a faint smile and quietly answered that after more than 10 years of loyalty, this was the very least the company could do for him. However, the 10 years he had devoted to the company no longer meant anything to him anymore. Uncle Suho sighed heavily and agreed. He said they should have treated Kyung-suk better while she was still alive. They should have at least let her hold a grandchild before she passed away. Trying to lighten the mood, Uncle Junho spoke up. He said that if Kyung-suk had truly gone to heaven, then she was probably being spoiled by their parents and their older sister up there. He then smiled faintly and reminded everyone how much their eldest sister had adored Kyung-suk. Suho nodded in agreement and said Kyung-suk had also deeply looked up to their eldest sister. The atmosphere gradually turned nostalgic as the two men continued reminiscing. One of them sighed and muttered that if their older sister had still been alive, they might have learned more from her and lived like proper people. He added regretfully that they could have even helped Kyung-suk continue her studies too. As Min-wook listened to the conversation, he quietly realized once again that his mother's deepest wish had always been to study. At that moment, Min-wook's thoughts turned dark. Rage surged through him as he blamed everything on one man, Lee Dong-ho. He clenched his fists and remembered how their mother had suffered ever since she was a child because of him. Dong-ho, the eldest son of the house, had gathered every last bit of money the family had, even selling the deed to the house before running away. People later whispered that he had wasted all the money and become too ashamed to face his family anymore. In the end, Dong-ho had taken his own life. It had all begun on January 2, 1962. Back then, Min-wook's mother was only 12 years old, just a 5th grade elementary school student. But despite her young age, disaster had already struck the family. They had gone completely bankrupt, left without a single coin to their name. As Min-wook remembered those painful stories, anger twisted across his face. He muttered bitterly that none of it would have happened if that scoundrel Lee Dong-ho had never existed. Hearing his words, one of the older men gently told him to stop talking about Dong-ho like that. He sighed and explained that those had simply been terrible times. According to him, it was unfair to place all the blame on the eldest brother alone. The old man quietly admitted that he did resent Dong-ho a little, but only because of regret. He said he understood everything now and was merely speaking from lingering sorrow, but Min-wook could not accept it. He declared that no matter how terrible those times had been, he still resented Dong-ho deeply and could never understand him. If it had been him, he would have lived differently no matter what happened. But now, he could not do anything. Looking at those precious moments frozen inside the phone, Min-wook realized something too late once again. Regret always arrived one step too late. After leaving the funeral hall, Min-wook returned home. Countless thoughts filled his mind. For a long time, he kept thinking about what he could still do for his mother, even now after everything had already ended. But when he finally entered the empty house, reality hit him once again. There was nothing left he could truly do for her anymore. As he stood silently in the living room, something suddenly caught his attention. His eyes narrowed in confusion when he noticed a strange talisman lying nearby. He picked it up carefully and stared at it. He remembered his mother happily holding the same talisman while calling out to him. She told him that she had spent a lot of money on it because people said it was incredibly powerful. She instructed him that when the day came that he truly needed it, he should do exactly as she told him. Min-wook suddenly snapped in frustration. He shouted at his mother, asking how many times he had told her not to waste money on useless things like that talisman. His voice was loud and sharp, causing his mother to flinch in surprise. Trying to explain herself, she softly insisted that it was different. She told him the talisman had come from an incredibly gifted master, but Min-wook only grew more irritated. He scoffed at her explanation and asked what kind of nonsense she was talking about. In anger, he shouted that if she really had money to waste on things like that, she should have just given the money to him instead. Even after their argument, Min-wook's mother quietly placed the talisman somewhere he could see it clearly. She gently told him that one day he should visit the master who had given it to her. Looking back, Min-wook could not believe how he had ended up living as such a rotten son. Min-wook let out a tired sigh. After thinking for a long time, he finally decided there was only one thing left he could still do for his mother. Since it was her final wish, he searched through her phone and found the fortune teller's number. He decided to visit the place himself, thinking he would at least confirm whether it was all a scam or not. When he arrived, the old master calmly explained the process to him. He said Min-wook only needed to write his name on the back of the talisman using his own blood and add a date as well. Once the ritual was complete, he would return to that exact date. Hearing the explanation about traveling back in time, Min-wook frowned and let out an awkward laugh. He muttered that it obviously sounded like a scam. However, the old man simply looked at him and asked whether that was truly what he believed. He explained that if someone believed, then it could become real, but if they refused to believe, then it would remain nothing more than empty words. Min-wook forced out a nervous smile while listening to the strange explanation. Half-jokingly, he asked if that meant he would actually become that person. The old master suddenly leaned forward. A strange smile appeared on his face as he let out a low chuckle. He told Min-wook that no matter what he was thinking, returning to the past inside the body of someone still alive was impossible anyway. Because of that, the exact date he wished to return to did not truly matter. Hearing those words, Min-wook's expression immediately stiffened in confusion. Before he could properly react, the old man revealed that instead of going back normally, the moment the original owner of a body died, Min-wook would enter that body in their place and live again. The old master calmly told Min-wook once again that if he truly believed, then it would eventually come to pass. He added that everything depended entirely on him. After hearing those mysterious words, Min-wook accepted the strange talisman and spent the next year living with absolute faith that the impossible would one day happen. During that time, he devoted himself completely to preparation. His room slowly filled with books, newspapers, notes, and endless records about economics, businesses, history, and powerful families. Every wall became covered with information from different decades. He researched important figures, major companies, future opportunities, and even personal details about influential people. There were reminders pinned everywhere, timelines stretching across the walls, and stacks of documents scattered around the room. Min-wook spent countless days and nights studying everything he believed could help him survive and rise to the top once he entered the past. By the end of that year, his entire life had become focused on preparing for the moment he would finally be reborn into another person's body. Standing before his parents' grave, Min-wook quietly said that he was home. A faint smile appeared on his face as he admitted that he missed both his mother and father deeply. Still, he felt that he missed his mother a little more, perhaps because it had only been a year since she passed away. After taking a deep breath, he finally made up his mind. He declared that it was time to try it. Holding the talisman in his mouth, he thought to himself that if everything turned out to be a lie, then he would simply return to living his empty and half-hearted life as before. Without hesitation, he pulled out a small knife and cut his finger. Then he carefully unfolded the talisman with trembling hands and wrote the date and time. Then he slowly pushed the paper into his mouth and swallowed it. Almost immediately, he began coughing violently. The talisman felt stuck in his throat, making him clutch his chest in discomfort. Sweat rolled down his face as he muttered that nothing was happening at all. For a brief moment, disappointment crossed his mind. Then suddenly, everything changed. A terrifying force erupted around him without warning. The offering scattered across the graveyard as his body was violently thrown backward. His eyes widened in shock as he could barely process what was happening. The world around him blurred, and panic surged through him. He could only scream in confusion as the strange power swallowed him whole. As the violent force consumed him, Min-wook's thoughts spiraled into panic. He could not understand what was happening to his body. Everything around him melted into blinding white light, and fear gripped his heart as he wondered if he was dying. A massive pillar of golden light suddenly engulfed him completely. Floating helplessly inside it, he began cursing himself in regret. He wondered if he had made a mistake by trusting that suspicious fortune teller and writing Lee Dongho's name on the talisman. His consciousness started fading in and out. Through the endless darkness, he weakly called out Dongho's name while trying to understand where he was. Then faint voices suddenly echoed around him. Someone urgently shouted at Dongho to open his eyes and asked if he was okay. Hearing the unfamiliar voices, Minwook slowly regained awareness, still confused about what had just happened to him. However, the moment he tried to move, panic filled his mind. He realized he could not control his body at all. He wondered in fear what was happening to him. Then a terrifying thought crossed his mind. The fortune teller's words suddenly resurfaced in his memory. He realized that he might have truly entered Lee Dongho's body right before his death, exactly as the fortune teller had predicted. Nearby, a shadowy man crawled desperately toward the bed while apologizing repeatedly to Dongho. The man's voice trembled with guilt and desperation. As the smoke filled the room, a terrifying realization struck Minwook. If this truly was 1962, the year Lee Dongho died, then the cause had to be coal gas. His eyes widened as he understood that Lee Dongho had died from carbon monoxide poisoning. Panic surged through Minwook's mind. If Lee Dongho had died this way, then what about him, the one who had just entered this body? Did that mean he was going to die the very moment he returned to the past? Gritting his teeth fiercely, he forced strength back into his body, thinking there was no way he was going to let that happen. The man desperately called out Dongho's name again and again, begging him to open his eyes. Dongho lay motionless on the bed, his body trembling weakly as if he could no longer put any strength into himself. The man beside him stared in panic. Tears formed in his eyes as he apologized to Dongho, admitting that he still wanted to live no matter what. He promised that he would definitely succeed and swore that he would repay Dongho's mother and younger siblings for everything. At the same time, Dongho struggled to stay conscious. His vision blurred as he realized he could no longer see his uncle's friend clearly. He wondered if the man in front of him was actually the one who had killed his uncle. The man lowered his head and told Dongho to rest in peace. But the moment he finished speaking, greed immediately appeared on his face. With trembling eyes, he suddenly began searching around frantically, wondering where Dongho had hidden the stock certificates. As the man continued speaking about selling the stocks Dongho had bought and giving the money to his parents and younger siblings, Dongho's trembling hand suddenly clenched tightly into a fist. In that instant, his eyes snapped open with fury. Before the man could react, Dongho lunged forward violently and smashed his fist straight into his face. The unexpected punch sent the man flying backward as he screamed in shock and pain. The man stared at Dongho in disbelief, barely able to process what had just happened. But Dongho slowly rose from the bed, his body shaking with rage. He cursed the man furiously, calling him a bastard for pretending to be a friend while allowing greed and money to blind him. Dongho accused him of trying to kill him. Dongho's eyes burned with murderous fury as he glared at the terrified man and declared that the one who was going to die was him. Dongho charged forward like a madman while the other man raised his hands in terror, desperately begging him to wait. But Dongho's rage had already exploded beyond control. He slammed his fists down again and again, screaming that everything was because of him. His mother had lived her entire life without a proper education. He yelled that she had always been ashamed because she could barely even write her own name. The man underneath him coughed blood and cried out in pain, completely unable to understand what Dongho was talking about. The man desperately told him to stop. He apologized to him again and again and admitted that greed had blinded him. He weakly apologized once more, telling Dongho to hit him more if he wanted because he truly was sorry. Dongho slowly approached him and coldly asked for his name. The man looked confused at first before stammering out that his name was Minsu, Kim Minsu. He then muttered that Dongho had inhaled far too much coal gas. The moment Dongho heard that, his expression twisted violently. He grabbed Minsu by the collar and demanded to know what he meant by coal gas. Dongho's mind raced in confusion. He wondered whether he had really passed out because of coal gas or if Minsu had intentionally done something to him. Minsu desperately tried to calm him down and asked Dongho if he truly did not recognize him. He swore that no matter how greedy he became, he would never go as far as murdering someone. He had only acted that way because he believed Dongho was already going to die anyway. Dongho clicked his tongue and slowly calmed down as he looked around the room. After thinking carefully, he realized the coal briquette heater was completely empty. That meant this was neither suicide nor murder, but simply a tragic coal gas accident during the middle of winter. But then his eyes suddenly locked onto the calendar hanging on the wall. His expression stiffened in confusion as he stared at the date written on it. It was February 1962. This was the exact time period right after Lee Dong-ho had died. Back in 1962, there had been a massive stock market crash that ruined countless people overnight. His uncle had been swept up in it, lost all of his money, and eventually ended up dying miserably. His mother's family had been so busy trying to survive during those harsh times that they could not even properly recover the body. She said that if his uncle had not become obsessed with stocks and rushed all the way to Seoul, things might have turned out differently. Hearing this, Min-wook realized that if the stock market crash had happened in May of 1962, then Lee Dong-ho should not have died before June. Yet the calendar clearly showed February. That could only mean one thing. Lee Dong-ho had died several months earlier than he originally should have. The realization made Dong-ho freeze for a moment before a grin slowly spread across his face. To him, this felt like an unbelievable stroke of luck right after returning. Meanwhile, Min-soo explained what had happened that night. Before going to bed, he had gone out to buy cigarettes. But while he was outside, the nighttime curfew suddenly began. Left with no choice, he hid inside an empty warehouse until the curfew ended. As soon as it was over, he rushed back home, only to find Dong-ho foaming at the mouth from the coal gas. At the same time, fragments of Lee Dong-ho's memories continued mixing together inside Min-wook's mind. He remembered that during this era there was a strict nighttime curfew that lasted from midnight until 4 in the morning. Streets would empty completely during those hours, and anyone caught outside would be chased down by the police. Dong-ho calmly told Min-soo to relax and sit properly instead of acting so nervous in front of a friend, but Min-soo immediately shook his head and insisted that he was comfortable staying like that. As Dong-ho watched him, fragments of memory surfaced in his mind. Kim Min-soo was one of the neighborhood boys who had spent his entire life supporting his widowed mother and 8 younger siblings. Considering the crushing burden on his shoulders, Dong-ho understood why Min-soo might have become blinded by money. According to Lee Dong-ho's memories, he had managed to gather 5 million won by even selling the deed to the house. In modern value, it would have been worth around 50 million won, an enormous amount of money for that era. And all of that money had been poured into the physical stock certificates lying in front of him. They were shares of the listed company called the Daejeong Stock Exchange. Lee Dong-ho had invested the entire 5 million won into those shares back in January of 1962, buying them at only 0.95 won per share. Curious, Dong-ho asked what the current price of Daejeong stock was. Min-soo answered that the shares had recently reached 3.65 won. The moment Dong-ho heard that number, his eyes widened. In just a short amount of time, the investment had already multiplied by more than 300%. Including the original investment, the total value had already reached nearly 20 million won, and it was still only February. A faint smile slowly spread across his face as he muttered for Min-soo to pack his things once the sun came up. Deep inside, he could hardly believe the opportunity that had fallen into his hands. It seemed Lee Dong-ho truly had possessed an eye for making money. Later, Dong-ho stepped outside and walked through the streets of the city. The atmosphere of the era surrounded him everywhere he looked. Nearby, several children sat together eating from metal bowls. One of them shouted excitedly that there was meat in the porridge. Another quickly laughed and explained that it was only leftover US Army cigarette butts someone had picked up. A third child suddenly cried out after finding a toothpick mixed inside the food. Watching the scene, Dong-ho quietly recognized the dish they were eating. It was the infamous pig slop porridge, the desperate meal many poor people survived on during those difficult times. The meal was made from food waste discarded by the US military bases after the war. Even something like that was still out of reach for countless homeless children wandering the streets. Although the Korean War armistice had been signed back in 1953, for ordinary people, the struggle for survival had never truly ended. Every single person was still fighting their own war every day. As Dong-ho thought about his mother, he could not help but wonder how she had managed to endure all those years without Lee Dong-ho by her side. At that moment, Min-soo approached him and casually asked if he was hungry and wanted some pig slop porridge. Dongho's face immediately stiffened, and he quickly refused, saying he was fine. Soon after, Minsu called out to him, asking if he really planned to stay there any longer. He suggested they should sell all the stocks, head down to Gunwi, and finally enjoy life properly. However, Dongho refused, telling Minsu that he was not planning to sell his shares yet. If he wanted to leave, then he could sell his own shares and head down first. Dongho looked at him in disbelief and asked if Minsu seriously thought they would keep sharing a room together after this. He said that he would let him off this time because of their history, but the next time they met, they would basically be strangers. Hearing those words, Minsu lowered his head and apologized to Dongho with a trembling voice. Dongho quietly looked at him and thought that, in the end, Minsu was still just a kid barely 20 years old. To someone like him, who had already lived past 40 before returning to the past, Minsu only looked like a lovable brat. With a faint smile, Dongho gently told him that he did not hold any grudges against him. Then he reached out and patted him on the head. Minsu panicked the moment Dongho raised his hand. He immediately covered his head and cried out, begging Dongho not to hit him. They were standing in the middle of the main road, and Dongho could only let out an awkward sigh. In his previous life, he had been known as the useless son of a wealthy family, and now he apparently looked like some kind of street thug. Thinking about it, he wondered if he could really keep living like this. With a helpless smile, Dongho reassured Minsu that he was not going to hit him anymore because he had changed. Then Dongho pulled out a thick stack of money and handed it over. He calmly said that it should be around 300,000 yuan and told him to buy some meat soup for his younger siblings. He also reminded him that he had earned all of that money himself. Minsu stared at him with tears streaming down his face. In a trembling voice, he called out Dongho's name and asked if he was truly forgiving him. Dongho calmly told Minsu that whether he forgave him or not did not really matter anymore. From now on, they would live like strangers. Still, he added that if fate ever brought them together again someday, they could sit down and share a drink. For the next week, Dongho focused entirely on making the drifting memories of Dongho truly his own. At the same time, he trained relentlessly and worked to adapt to living in his new body. Even he found it unbelievable that a man in his 20s could possess such monstrous strength. He felt that if he did not tire himself out every single morning, the overflowing energy in his body would never settle down. As the days passed, Dongho fully accepted the truth. He was Lee Dongho now. One day he headed toward Myeongdong. During the Japanese occupation, Cheongmuro had developed into a major commercial district, and Myeongdong naturally grew into a bustling shopping area alongside it. As Dongho walked through the busy streets of Myeongdong, he sat down at a cafe and ordered coffee. However, to his surprise, the waitress warned him not to say such dangerous things so openly. She explained that coffee was treated like some kind of foreign luxury item and could easily attract unwanted attention. The woman looked at him suspiciously and asked if he was some sort of intelligence agent. She even wondered if he had just come up from the countryside because of how casually he talked about such things. Dongho calmly handed over 1,000 yuan. Seeing the amount, she quickly became excited and said they had to bring it out immediately. As she hurried away, she looked back at him and remarked that he really did look like a rich city boy. Dongho could only let out an awkward laugh in response. While he sat quietly inside the cafe, someone from a distance continued watching him carefully. After observing him for a while, the mysterious person muttered that Dongho looked like a student. As Dongho quietly drank his coffee, the mysterious man watching him suddenly approached and sat across from him with a grunt. Dongho calmly asked what he wanted. The man smiled and admitted that he had become curious after seeing such a young man casually spend an entire 1,000 yuan on a single cup of coffee. He explained that anyone capable of spending money so freely in Myeongdong had to be someone unusual. Then the man leaned back in his chair with a grin and casually asked if Dongho had also invested in Daejung stock. Hearing those words, Dongho's expression instantly changed. The coffee cup paused near his lips as surprise flashed across his eyes. The mysterious man calmly told Dongho that he had probably already made a huge profit from the stock. Since it was not too late yet, he advised him to cash out and walk away while he still could. Hearing that, Dongho narrowed his eyes in confusion. He could not understand why this stranger was suddenly saying such things to him. At the same time, curiosity rose inside his mind as he wondered if he should probe the man a little further. Dong Ho casually replied that the stock still seemed to have a long way left to rise. With a faint smirk, he asked if the man simply hated seeing other people succeed. The older man remained silent for a moment before asking if that was truly Dong Ho's answer. Then, leaning forward with a strange smile, he called him young man and remarked that Dong Ho had quite the appetite for money. He reached into his coat and placed a business card on the table. Dong Ho glanced down and realized it belonged to a reporter. The man then waved his hand casually and told him not to take his words too badly. He claimed he was only saying it for his own good before turning around and leaving the cafe. After the man disappeared, Dong Ho sat alone in silence while examining the card carefully. The name printed on it was from Dongsan Daily newspaper, reporter Park Won-sik. Quietly, more than 2 months had passed since reporter Park Won-sik advised him to withdraw his investment. Since then, Daejung stock had continued soaring higher and higher. By the end of April, the market had already turned into a complete speculative frenzy. Dong Ho believed that reporter Park Won-sik had probably spoken out of goodwill. As a reporter, the man likely possessed information of his own and wanted to warn others to calm down and pull their money out of the Daejung stock craze. But unlike everyone else, Dong Ho held far more certain information in his hands. Today was April 30, 1962. Myeongdong's stock exchange district was overflowing with investors and traders, all rushing around in excitement as the speculative fever continued spreading across the city. Using the 5 million won investment capital that Lee Dong-ho had brought, he purchased an enormous amount of Daejung stock, in total 5.26 million shares of Daejung stock. And today was the day he decided to sell everything. The people around him froze in shock. Some stared at him in disbelief, while others asked if they had heard correctly. One man widened his eyes and repeated that the young man was talking about 5 million shares. At that moment, Daejung stock, which had once been worth only 0.95 won per share, had skyrocketed to an unbelievable 41 won. The profits were astronomical. It was a return of more than 40 times the original investment, over 4,200%. Roughly speaking, the 50 million won had now become nearly 2 billion. Without hesitation, he sold every single share. Meanwhile, the people around the exchange mocked him openly. Some laughed and called him a foolish young man who understood nothing about stocks. Others hurried to buy up the shares he had just sold, believing he had made a terrible mistake. A few even pitied him, saying that he would probably regret selling those stocks for the rest of his life. However, Dong-ho did not care. To him, those so-called stock people were nothing more than fools who believed they were smarter than everyone else. None of them realized that from this very moment onward, history was about to repeat itself through another devastating wave of stock speculation. Later, he withdrew all of his funds, but he only withdrew 10 million won in cash and deposited the rest into his account. At the same time, he already knew the truth. Starting that very day, the leading stocks would begin collapsing at terrifying speed. The market soon descended into complete chaos. Investors screamed in panic as prices crashed like falling blades across the trading boards. Fear spread through the exchange hall, while fortunes disappeared in an instant. In the end, the massive collapse became known as the stock market crash of 1962. Everything connected to the speculation frenzy crumbled apart, leaving behind only ruin and countless victims of greed. As Dong-ho quietly walked out of the exchange building, some traders continued talking about him behind his back. One man asked if the others had seen the tall young man who had just sold everything and left. He wondered if some kind of information had leaked out. However, the others immediately dismissed the idea. They laughed and claimed that the young man was simply a frightened amateur who panicked after the stock price rose too high. He was Yoon Eung-sang. Stroking his chin thoughtfully, he admitted that the timing of the young man's actions felt strangely perfect. Even so, he convinced himself that it was probably nothing more than beginner's luck. In truth, Yoon Eung-sang was no genius investor at all. Behind the reputation he had built for himself, he was actually the con artist responsible for igniting the speculation frenzy that eventually led to the stock market crash. He was a swindler whose schemes would go down in history. At that moment, reporter Park Won-sik pushed through the crowd with a camera in his hands. Snapping photographs rapidly, he shouted that he would make sure the entire world learned about Yoon Eung-sang's schemes. But when he saw Dongho sell all his stocks, he began wondering whether the young man had pulled out his investment because he possessed inside information, or if he had simply listened to his warning. No matter the reason, he was glad the young man had escaped before disaster struck. In his eyes, the young man had managed to step off the express train headed straight to hell just in time. Meanwhile, Dongho walked through the pouring rain with excitement burning inside him. He could hardly believe that he was finally rich. He thought about meeting his mother again and imagined using the money to send her to school while still living a luxurious life himself. To him, it felt like an incredible era where money could endlessly create even more money. He decided that his next destination would be Gunwi. He planned to prepare carefully for the future that was about to unfold, step by step. Deep inside, he swore that his mother would never again suffer through the pain of that harsh era. But as he walked through the rain, memories of the suffering around him surfaced in his mind. He remembered the misery people had endured and began questioning himself. He wondered why he had studied so hard in his previous life and why he had been given the chance to return to the past. Standing alone beneath the storm, he thought that protecting only his own family from the rain pouring down on the entire world might not truly satisfy him. Lee Dongho, who was once known as Seo Minwook, looked at the miserable people suffering around him. He questioned himself about whether he was truly satisfied with only protecting himself and his family. So, without wasting more time, he traveled south of the Han River. He stood quietly on a small boat crossing the water. An old man steering the boat looked at him curiously and asked what a young man he had never seen before was doing heading toward the southern side of the Han River. With a faint smile, Dongho replied that he simply wanted to see the place at least once. The old boatman stared at him silently for a moment before explaining that Yeongdong was nothing more than rice fields and orchards. He wondered what there was to see in such an ordinary place. Hearing that, Dongho gazed into the distance and calmly answered that if he did not see those rice fields and orchards now, he would never see them again. The old man narrowed his eyes slightly and remarked that it sounded as though the young man was saying those rice fields and orchards would soon change into something entirely different. As Dongho listened to the old boatman, he felt that the elderly man was somehow different from everyone else he had met. Looking at the flowing river, he told the old man that even rivers and mountains changed over 10 years. No matter what they became, they would still continue to change. The old man agreed with him and told him to enjoy the scenery before continuing on his way. Dongho thanked the old man and headed toward Yeongdong, the land that would one day become Gangnam, the Golden Prime district of Korea. As Dongho walked across the wide empty land, he admitted that he had never imagined it would feel so vast and open, yet he already knew what the future held for this place. After the Hanam Bridge was built in 1969, the area would transform into land worth as much as gold itself. Towering buildings and endless development would eventually rise there. The land would bring unimaginable profits to powerful people and to the few fortunate enough to ride the wave of skyrocketing land prices. But Dongho knew the truth. Out of all the current landowners, only a tiny number would truly enjoy the coming boom. Perhaps only 1 in 100 would actually benefit from it. With that thought in mind, he arrived at a small real estate office, preparing to take the first step toward the future he already knew was coming. After thoroughly inspecting the vast lands stretching from the area that would one day become Hanam to Jamwon, and from Banpo to the regions that would later become Seocho and Yangjae, Seo Minwook finally made his decision. Standing before the endless open fields and mountains, he calmly declared that he would buy every single plot the broker had shown him. The broker's eyes widened in shock. To Dongho, the land was unbelievably cheap, averaging only 1,300 won per pyong. It felt like a heaven-sent fortune had suddenly fallen into his hands. He completed the purchase of 40,000 pyong of prime Gangnam land. Even so, he intentionally added extra money on top of the agreed price so the landowners would not feel cheated or shortchanged. As night fell outside the small real estate office, Seo Minwook explained that he would withdraw the remaining amount from his account later and that the cash he had brought should be used as the down payment for now. The moment the broker saw the mountain of cash, he nearly lost his composure. In disbelief, he shouted, asking how much money was piled there. Overcome with excitement, he immediately called for meat to be brought out, eager to celebrate the unbelievable deal that had just been made. Dongho ended up staying at the real estate owner's house for 3 more days just to stamp and finalize the countless land deeds he had purchased. Later, while riding the boat once again, the old boatman asked him whether he had managed to properly see all the orchards and rice fields he once wanted to visit. With a relaxed smile, Dong-ho answered that he had seen them thoroughly and that they were even more beautiful than he had imagined. The old boatman quietly replied that it did not seem like Dong-ho had merely looked at them. Dong-ho lowered the brim of his hat slightly and admitted with a faint grin that once he saw those lands, he wanted to own them. So, in the end, he bought a little. Hearing that, the old boatman narrowed his eyes and let out a small smile. He muttered that perhaps the times truly had changed. Then he jokingly remarked that Dong-ho's idea of a little was completely different from his own. For a moment, Dong-ho could only stare at him in surprise. He had expected that the old boatman was no ordinary man. The way he spoke made it clear that he understood everything perfectly. With an awkward smile, Dong-ho admitted that he had misspoken earlier. Instead of buying only a little land, he confessed that he had actually bought quite a lot. The old boatman let out a quiet laugh and asked Dong-ho what he planned to do with all that land. Hearing this, Dong-ho calmly asked if the old man was curious. The boatman smiled and answered that in over 10 years of working as a boatman, he had never met anyone who talked the way Dong-ho did. Hearing that, Dong-ho admitted that he was curious as well. He asked why someone like the old man was working as a boatman in a place like this. The old man tilted his head slightly and asked what he meant by that. Dong-ho quickly explained that he was not trying to look down on any profession. However, the old man did not seem like someone who could simply be an ordinary boatman. He also added that he doubted the old man had truly been working as a boatman continuously for all those 10 years. The old boatman smiled and told Dong-ho to answer first, promising that he would answer afterward as well. He then asked what Dong-ho planned to do with all the land he had bought. A faint smile appeared on Dong-ho's face as he answered that the land he purchased was an investment in the future. The old man's expression turned cold as he clicked his tongue in disappointment. He declared that Dong-ho was far more disappointing than he had expected. Pointing directly at him, the old man stated that he did not deserve to hear his answer. Dong-ho stared at him in confusion and asked if the word investment sounded wrong somehow. The old boatman narrowed his eyes and observed that Dong-ho looked barely 20 years old. He asked if his family had collaborated with the Japanese or if he had a soldier in his family. He scoffed that someone his age should not already be talking nonsense about investment. Dong-ho felt his irritation rising. In his mind, he complained that the old man was seriously getting on his nerves. Still, he could not simply dismiss him as a cranky old geezer because there was something strangely intriguing about him. Trying to stay calm, Dong-ho asked what investment meant to him. The old man answered sharply that investment was simply letting money make more money without sweating for it. He declared that a young man should instead be sweating and working hard to earn money, building and accomplishing something with his own hands. In his eyes, Dong-ho would never understand that truth, not in his entire life. Hearing those words, Dong-ho clenched his teeth. Yet instead of doubting himself, his conviction only grew stronger. Deep down, he became even more certain that he was not wrong. He calmly replied that just as his idea of a little was different from the old man's, their ideas about investment were different as well. The old boatman snorted and dismissed his words as nonsense. Suddenly, both of them raised their voices at the same time. The old man shouted about investment while Dong-ho loudly declared what he truly intended to do. He was going to farm that land on a massive scale. He declared that he would transform everything into huge farmland. The old boatman froze in shock. His reflection trembled across the water as he stared at the young man in disbelief. After a long pause, he stammered and asked if he had really said farm.